I feel like this is a common introduction already. I'm going to talk about something that isn't brought down in Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. It's a minig vasik in Klal Yisrael, which I think is right in our wheelhouse. That's what we like to explore. So I'm going to start with that. I grabbed I'm not sure. Okay, fine. So I want to talk about some of the minhagim of Shovavim. Everyone's familiar. The first six parshias of Shemais are the acrostic of Shovavim, and there's various minhagim and Klal Yisrael about it. I think what became very well known and very famous is after the Arizal, the Talmidei Arizal, the Mekubalim's cook on Shovavim and the specific Averis that Shovavim is misakin for, and the school of the school says man that Shovavim is misakin those Averis. But I just want to be marchiv the area a little bit, and maybe just start from the beginning a little. Now, I'm gonna take a side trip to get here, just because I think it's interesting and worth sharing, and we'll circle back around to how this connects to Shovavim. So as follows. I think everybody's familiar that in the early 1800s there were the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, right? Napoleon rose to power in France in Be'erich 1800, and there was a series of the Napoleonic Wars where one after the other he launched different campaigns against different parts of Europe and the world, b'chlal, and he was fabulously successful in the beginning. He conquered tremendous amounts of territory and resources, and many coalitions rose to battle him and were met with failure. He was fabulously successful, and Napoleon's success led to a whole genre of rabbinic commentary on Napoleon, pro or against. Many different rabbanim spoke pro or against Napoleon if they wanted him to be successful or not successful. Now, so let's just get some what we're talking about. So Napoleon starts his campaign, let's say in the year 1800, Pachas Yaiser. The whole thing lasts about 14 years. By 1814, I think he was exiled the first time. He escapes, he comes back, he launches one more final round of his battles, and then by 1815, he's off the global scene, and he dies 6 years later on an island. What did he say? No, Waterloo's one of the main battles that turned the tide against him. Waterloo's where the English repel him. The Russians have their story, the English have their story, the Austrians have their story. There's a lot of different schayas, but he gets retired to an island, I think that's called maybe, what do you say? Elba and St. Helena. I'm not sure which one's the first one, which one's the second one. One of them he goes to first and he escapes. That might be Elba. And then the second round he goes to St. Helena, and then he's not heard from again in 1815. That's the end. And he writes an autobiography, which is actually very interesting, full of his shvachim and successes. And 6 years later he dies over there. Now, so some of the primary people who were affected by Napoleon were the Eastern European Rebbe's, because I'll explain why. The Rebbe's who lived in Russia and Litva and Poland lived under extremely oppressive conditions, right? There was governments that were raided for them very, very much, and they weren't able to practice their religion freely as they desired. Now, Napoleon, one of the main pieces of his campaign was equality. Napoleon was going around the world pushing equality. He wanted that everyone should be equal. So when Napoleon would show up in a town, if he would conquer a swath of Russia, and the Jews who lived there, they would suddenly find themselves with a lot more freedom than they had until that point. So it was very important to the Jews. Are they pro or are they against? Va'id, Napoleon himself had a shtickle obsession with the Jews. There's many stories of him asking Jews, Mashal, that Napoleon, when he was doing very well, decided that he wanted to have a Sanhedrin. Maybe, I'm sure some people have heard of that. Napoleon wanted to have a Sanhedrin. He called Rav David Sinsheim, the Mechaber of Shut Nishal David, which is a multi-volume sefer, a bona fide Talmud Chacham by all accounts, and he presented him with a whole list of questions about Yiddishkeit in the lead-up to forming a Bezdin. And the Nishal David wrote a tshuva to Napoleon where he answers all those different questions. We have that tshuva. The Chassam Sofer commented on that tshuva that one could not have done a better job. Like the Nishal David did a perfect job of threading the needle of staying authentic, but still saying things that wouldn't be, damaging or to the detriment of the Jews. Napoleon conquered Eretz Yisrael, a good halakim of it. He went from Egypt and then he went up, the coastline of Eretz Yisrael. He conquered many cities in Eretz Yisrael. Napoleon had a thing with the Jews, and the Jews had a thing with Napoleon. So the one of the most famous Rebbes who had major bikuris and critique of Napoleon was the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya. The Baal Tanya Kayidu was very against Napoleon. L'mashal, I think the Kedushas Levi felt that Napoleon was a Goy Gomagog and was worth investing in. The Kazhnitz Magid, the Yisrael, the Magid of Kazhnitz, felt that Napoleon was going to be the future. It was going to save Klal Yisrael. This was going to be the prelude to be a Mashiach. The Alter Rebbe was extremely against Napoleon. By Hasidim, they say a story that Rosh Hashanah was Nigzar and Shemayim. That Rosh Hashanah was going to be the time where the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbes who were against Napoleon and the Kazhnitz Magid and Mendel of Rimanov and the Rebbes who were pro-Napoleon were going to be able to hash it out in Shemayim. And it seems that all the Rebbes on the various sides of this equation were aware of the seminal moment of Rosh Hashanah of that year that was coming, and each one of them made their plans to try to tip the scale. And in the court of the Kazhnitz Magid, they got up, they went to the mikveh, they davened with tremendous islahavas, they got the tkiyas, went to the mikveh again, tikkunim, they blew tkiyas as well as it's ever been blown before in Kazhnitz. And then at the end of it, the Magid said, the Litvak, which is strange, he was referring to the Baal Tanya who lived in Lita, the Litvak hat es sheneis gechabt. The Litvak hat es sheneis gechabt. They found that after Rosh Hashanah that in Liadi or Liajna or wherever the Baal Tanya was living at that time, the Baal Tanya had risen the second time and was mahapach liyaitris. Before davening even started, he blew the whole sidra of tkiyas, got it out of the way, did it properly, was the first one at the table, and then he was minatzeach. In Chabad, there's another legend. I'm digressing here for a minute, just because it's to me it's interesting. So I'm digressing for a minute. In Chabad, there's another legend that the Rebbe Kayidu had a son, Reb Moshe, who was not a Chabadnik. He spoke Russian. He wrote Russian. He didn't live. A lot of people feel he wasn't from. In the later half of his life, but the Alter Rebbe had a son, Reb Moshe, who in Chabad they say the Rebbe sent him to Napoleon's camp to be a spy. Because he was a polyglot, he spoke many languages, he was a cultured individual, to be a spy for the Russian government, and he, made himself comfortable in the French HQ, and everything that he would hear back, he would report to the Russian commanders on the front, and he was, a big contributor to the defeat of Napoleon at the hands of the Russian. Now, Chabad has a march that they sing on Yom Kippur, no less, which is called Napoleon's March. That's the name of the song. It's called Napoleon's March. The legend goes that Napoleon had a march prepared for his victory march in France that he was planning on using, and the Alter Rebbe's son, Reb Moshe, stole the victory march. And by stealing the victory march and bringing it back to Chabad for them to be Mekadesh on Yom Kippur, he stole Napoleon's potential for a victory. When one takes the victory march, you take the whole victory. You don't just take the victory march, the song. So there's many of these legends upon him in different Hasidic courts about how to look at Napoleon. So now let me try to bring us back to Shovavim for a second. So the Chassam Sofer lived in Pressburg, which was at that time part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Pressburg was a city that was set siege. Napoleon set siege to the city of Pressburg. It was right on a river. It was a very important city. Napoleon set siege. And the Chassam Sofer has I guess you could call it kind of an autobiography. In Sefer HaZikaron, the Chassam Sofer writes like different things that happened, his story. And in Sefer HaZikaron, he spends a lot of time writing about the siege on Pressburg and how it affected his Kehillah. And he writes about the day that it started, and just to hear the Chassam Sofer describe the sound of crashing cannonballs and the way he's describing the scenes of battle between the French and the Austrians on the banks of the river of the city, and the Jews hid in the shul, and then he talks about how it got worse, and they set siege, and it progressively got worse, until finally the Jewish Kehillah had to run away from Pressburg, and the Chassam Sofer left the Kehillah left Pressburg for a certain number of months. I think it's about 6 or 7 months that they left. And the Chassam Sofer, it's a great read, because the Chassam Sofer in his way, like he's Mishalev Kol Kula, just in retelling like a mundane story, like the amount of Gemaras, and like, by the way, once I'm talking about this, I said a drasha, and it could be like an 8-page digression about a drasha about, like the Chassam Sofer, it's beautiful to read in any case. But the Chassam Sofer writes the story of the city of Pressburg and their interaction with Napoleon. He writes against Napoleon that we're hoping that our Austrian forces will be menatzeach eventually. Now, we don't know if he felt that way because he agreed with the Baal Tanya that Napoleon was bad for Jews, like if freedom is bad for Jews, or stam because he was living under Austrian territory and he didn't have a choice to say something different. But B'chalif in the Chassam Sofer, they writes, anti-Napoleon. Now, at the end of it, when the battle finally ends and the Austrians retake the city, so then the Chassam Sofer writes as follows, and this is the part that has to do with our topic. I'll read it. Chassam Sofer writes that. So he says as follows. Hang on. I'm an old man. I can't turn the pages. He says as follows. He says, "B'yoyim aleph heimar cheshvan, kol hatayr nishma, kol ram begilgal achayzer miyagin l'simcha." A loud kol goes out, something changing us over miyagin l'simcha. Ki asu shalom zeh zeh. A ceasefire was reached between the Austrians and the French. V'kana hasreifa nishmas b'chol ireinu en kol anois m'chamikim kol sasim v'simcha. And the coil that's reverberating in the kehila has changed. It's no longer a coil of disaster. Now it's a coil of simcha. And the 4 weeks that followed after this ceasefire, the enemy, the Frenchmen, left from over here. And we started to repair the walls. The city was built up. Hashem benched us that the second iteration of Preshburg was even more great and stronger than the first one. Okay, says B'yom Zayin Teves. He says B'basri Tzedek B'Kahal Hashem. When I expressed that the completion, that we've made it, we've survived, we're done in the Kahal Hashem Beis HaKnesset HaKadosh Dekan. Amarti li Yisnachan L'Kvaya Yom Mayid L'Hakav Teidel Hashem. I said it would be worthy if we were to establish a day to say thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for this meifus that He saved us. So he says as follows: we can never say thank you enough. Let's do what we can and let's not be a kafei teva. So he says v'yoyim hey Parsha Shmos. He says the day that appealed to me was the 5th day of Parsha Shmos, Thursday of Parsha Shmos. Shehi tainis Shovavim. That's the day of the tainis of Shovavim. So he says what happened, and here you get a great description of what Shovavim looked like, 200 years ago. Not, but Shovavim looked like, just Mesiach Lefituma 200 years ago. Says the Chassam Sofer, Hisanu Roiv Kol Bnei Akila Kadesh Hashem Yishmereim. Almost all of the Kehila fasted. Ubeshachar Sachar Atfila Nemru Oisin HaMizmayrim Mamish Amarnu B'mei Yeinu V'Lachtzenu. Incidentally, we said the same Pizmayim, the same Slichas that we would say on a tainus that we were making to ask for salvation, we said on a tainus that's the tainus of Shovavim. Imi hiratzon shachat hilim v'achaz ahevi kolish nidvasa. And here you hear. So 1 second. So let's just take note of the components that the Chassam Sofer is mapping us out for us. What's included in the Shovavim? So he says almost all of the kehila fasted. So we know fasting, a certain measure of fasting seems to be part of Shovavim. Second, he says we said special mizmayrim that you say in a tainus. So now we know slichus is part of the Shovavim itinerary. He continues. Everybody brought his donation to the two gabayim, alufim ashen ismanu alzeh. The smallest donation, 18, I guess, pennies, whatever the smallest, coin is. They brought it, and then so 1 second. So just to note, we have our fourth component. There seems to be some sort of tzedakah component. Every person, like a kaifer nefesh, every person is supposed to give a certain tzedakah component on Shovavim. And then he continues, "V'asinu pidyon nefesh al beizei fanim." And then we made a pidyon nefesh 2 different ways. Echad. Now I won't get into the details over here, but there's 2, kabbalistic different ways, different grouping of numbers that the Sefer uses to create pidyonis. So that's the 6th component that we have. There's some sort of kehila-wide pidyon that's in specific denominations that the Kehila makes as a pidyon on Shovavim. And then he says, we lein, then he talks about mincha, we said vayichal by mincha. We lein vayichal by mincha. We said you can pork him in Shemaya, Mishaberach, etc. Okay, and then he says, by the way, the money, it came out, when we were done with these various kaifer nefesh and pidyonis, we distributed the money to the Aniyah Eir, it ended up being somewhere in the vicinity of 600 gold coins, which must have been a lot. Now he says, Le'es mincha sa'er, that was all shachas. Le'es mincha erev achatilas mincha, the kriyas vayichal. Mincha we did with kriyas atayra vayichal. Namar b'tzibur b'chal batei knesiyos, mimizmer kuf zayin ve'elach. We said the back third of Tehillim, from capital kuf zayin all the way to the end of Tehillim, the back third of Tehillim, because mipnei sheyesh b'zeh kol minei hilulim v'shvachas rabbis al kol ha'toiv. That third of Tehillim is full of different shvachas that say thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for saving us. V'achik marsiyim kol elu nemer mizvah lamed, okay, and then v'achikach nishmas kol chai, ishtabach, like a me'ein ha'halo ha'gadol. Then we made a hatayv ha'meitiv b'tzibur, l'chol hatayv ha'meitiv v'yetiv lanu, v'nizke lachzais b'nayim Hashem b'har hatayv ha'lavonon, asher l'fnei Shem ha'shmoy yonan amen. That's how he ends off. So he says, this is the day that we chose to be a day of thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to make like a communal Suda Seidah of sorts, was Yom Hey of Shovavim. And in this, the Chassam Sofer charts out what we counted out to be 6 components of how a Shovavim looked. Mesiach Levitum 200 years ago. So Aleph, let's just say what's missing from this. What's omitted from this is the obvious one, is what we've all heard most about, specific Averis and the Kedusha V'Tahara and all that, which we'll see, of course, comes from somewhere. The Chassam Sofer doesn't mention it all. The Chassam Sofer just mentions it as B'teres Shavach Vayda, B'teres being Kilu like Azman Mesugel. Eis Mesugel of Korvet HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And for example, there's a Sefer Toldos Aaron from Reb Aaron of Zhitomar. He's a Talmud of the Kedushas Levi, where he says Shovavim is like a Seres Mei Tshuva. It's Leis Mitzvah. It's like a Hamelach Basada type of thing. It's a Leis Mitzvah. It's a Zman for all Korvet HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not specific. It's a Zman for Tshuva. Now this is some Sefer. So now let's wind this back a step. So now we led with the fact that Shovavim, the Minhagim of Shovavim are not Musker in the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam, the Rif, any of the Sefer Halacha. So what do you say? We're not going to leave that out. Yeah. So when I say Shulchan Aruch, I mean the Mechaber and the Ramah. I don't mean anyone who's on the page. I mean the Mechaber, the Ramah, the Rambam, the Rif, the Gedolei Rishonim, the Gedolei HaPoskim don't bring down this any of the Minhagim of Shovavim. Now the earliest place before the Magen Avraham is the Levush. The Levush is a Talmud of the Marshal, a Talmud of the Ramah. One of the primary links, I guess you could say, between the Magen Avraham, the Taz, the Shach, etc., and the Ramah and the Marshal. Almost, you won't go a page in Shulchan Aruch where Magen Avraham, the Taz, the Shach won't quote a Levush. The Levush is one of the primary links. Now, the Levush in Siman Tafresh Pehei, which is the Siman about the Arba Parshiyos, which is where the Magen Avraham is. So the Levush brings down the whole Seder of like which Parshiyos we lay in the whole year, basically. He links straight from Chanukah all the way till Purim. Every Parsha with every Haftarah. And then at the end of it there, he brings as follows. He says, Yesh Mekaymes Shenoigin, Bishnasa Ibr, Lekvaya Tainis B'chol Yom Chamishi Leparsha Shovavim. So now if you pay attention to the way the Levush says the minig is to be Keveya Tainis. The core minig of Shovavim was to be Keveya Tainis, L'chol Chamishi Leparsha Shovavim Tat. But there was one thing that I swallowed over there. He says Bishnasa Ibr. The Levush says, in an Ibr Yar, the weeks of Shovavim Tat, which includes Shmois Ve'er, Rabbi B'Shalach, Yisem Mishpat Truma, and Tesava, that's the Tat, the 2 tufs. There's a minig to fast on Yom Chamishi. Ve'hem Parshi Shmois Ve'er cancel. Now for us, the Kairim B'Shachar is Parshas Shavua, V'ayim Shem Yisrael, V'mincha, Kairim V'yichal, Maftir and Dirshu. We do the regular Kriya and Haftarah of a Tainis. V'noyigin Kain, V'pnei Shashana Arucha. Now here pay attention, here you're going to have a reason. V'noyigin Kain, Zakter, V'pnei Shashana Arucha. The year is long. Sheyesh Yoser Mechatzi Shana Ben Bahab de Marcheshvan LeBahab de Ir. Only in an Ibr York is this true. In a regular year, Bahab of Cheshvan and Bahab of Ir are not more than 6 months apart. He says in an Ibr York, you have 7 months between Bahab of Ir and Bahab of Marcheshvan. So meaning you have no tshuva days, no days that are mesugel, that are meyuchad for tshuva for over 6 months, which is more than a Chatzi Shana. Says the Levush, and he's not the first one to make it, he's not making this up, this comes from, I'll show you in a second. Says the Levush, since more than 6 months passes between that Bahab and this Bahab, Shem Yemei Tainis V'Kapar L'Yisrael, L'Kach Mesana, Ches Yamim, that's where we fast 8 days, Keneged HaChodesh HaIber, Keneged the extra month, the additional month of Chodesh HaIber. Now if I'll ask you, how is 8 days, what did you say? What is 8 days? What's 8 days? So if you do the math, if a Chodesh HaIber is an extra month is comprised of 4 weeks. Traditionally, when we make Tainesim, we do Beis V'Hei, Bahab. So if you do every Beis V'Hei of the Chodesh HaIber, comes out to 8 fast days that we should be doing during this Chodesh HaIber. We should do 8 fast days. Says the Levush, but it's very hard to fast. It's such a consistent, intense schedule of Beis Hei, Beis Hei, Beis Hei. So instead, we divided it up and we did just Hei over 8 weeks. To make the load a little lighter, we took those 8 Tainesim.
8 days.
It's 8 days of fasting. In an Ibr Year, there should be 8 days of extra fasting because Hayos, we need to break up the year. We can't have 6 months empty of any tefillah, and we're going to do Bahab for the whole month of the Ibr Year. So Bahab for a whole month of Ibr Year is 8 days. 8 days is too much to do in one big sidra like that. So we break it up. Shmois gets one, Ve'er gets one, Bay gets one, etc. And you have your 8 Tainesim spread over 8 weeks. Azizek Levush. Now, he's not the first one to say this. It really comes from earlier Ashkenazic Svarim, Rav Isaac Turnauer, Rav Yitzchak Turnauer, there's a Talmud of the Trumas Hadeshen. I'm going to forget the name of it, but everyone knows it. The Sefer from the Trumas Hadeshen's Talmud. Totally, help me out here. It's everyone knows what the name of the Sefer is. I'm just not remembering it the second, but the Sefer from the Trumas Hadeshen's Talmud, where he writes about many different minhagim from the Trumas Hadeshen, and he writes that his Rebbe, the Trumas Hadeshen, used to fast the Tanesim Shovavim. So we know the Trumas Hadeshen is a Rishon, used to fast it. So we know early Ashkenazi Rishonim fasted it. This Tainus, the earliest Makaros from early Ashkenazi Rishonim. Late Ashkenazi, very late Ashkenazi Rishonim. Like borderline, that's the first Makaros. Not that I know of. Oh, 1 second, yeah. Sure. Sure. A lot of the piyutim and the tefillas that we have come from Sephardi Kehilas. Because the Sephardim during the Tkufa when Shovavim became very popular, which is really during the Tkufa of the Mekubalim, a little bit later, another 200 years after these Rishonim we're talking about, it was popularized by the Talmidim of the Arizal, the Talmidim and the Talmidim of the Arizal, and they made up many piyutim. So in Kehilas that say piyutim and Shovavim, which I don't think anyone knows a kehil that actually says, I don't think anyone here has ever been. What did you say? Yeah, about that. But a lot of us Talmidim was Sephardim. Shem Shabbos, there's Yechidim, there's like Yechidim, a shul here, a shul there that actually do Minhagei Shovavim the real way that Minhagei Shovavim are done. But a lot of those piyutim come from Sephardi Kehilas, not Spanish, Portuguese, not the primary ones, but more like Italian and Moroccans and different other Sephardi Kehilas. But
when did this connection between Shovavim and Kedusha?
Hang on, we're getting there. I'm just showing that it starts earlier. And in its original, in its first Gilgul, Shovavim has nothing to do with that. Shovavim has to do with the year being very long and there being a need to do some tshuva. That's what Shovavim has to do with. And this Lush now. In Nibir, because we need extra.
Listen, most people hold.
In the Kiddush HaChodesh, right? Yeah, exactly.
Because of this 6 month gap. Because of the gap.
100%. So we need this extra. Now the Magen Avram, as like a footnote in Tafresh Pehei, also brings down the same. He quotes Levush. He brings this psak, and from there many others, the Shla, and many other places can bring it. But if you'll notice, the first 200-300 years of Haskaras of the Minhagim of Shovavim don't say a word about any specific Averis, and they also miyuchad say Shovavim tat. It's only in an Ibria. There'd be no tzarich to fast in a regular year. In a regular year, where you don't have a 6 month gap between Bahab of after Sukkot and Bahab after Pesach, there would be no reason for it. It's for Kedusha. That could be a Makar. Interesting. Well, the Gemara, because people do Averis on Yom Tiv, 100%. But so let's get to, so where does the narrative that we're all more familiar with, the narrative of being for specific Averis come from? So that comes from the Arizal and his Talmidim. Rav Chaim Vital, in many places, and many other Talmidim of the Arizal, write specifically that these weeks of Shovavim that are meant for fast days are miyuchad mesugul to be mechaper on certain averis. Meaning, every tkufa is miyuchad mesugul to be mechaper on certain averis, and this tkufa of the year is very mesugul to be mechaper on those averis. So when one is fasting and one is davening, and one is being Moisef Kedusha, focus on these specific, these specific averis that are connected to Tahara, and because this is your best opportunity to be misakin them. Now, for example, way later than the Arizal's Talmidim, you'll find in a lot of Chassidish Svarim that this Tkufa of Shovavim is very misogid misakin midis. For example, let's say Atzvos, Kas, Gaiva, etc. Not dafka these specific areas, and Ad Kedei Kach, there's a lot of literature of different Chassidish Svarim tying to every parsha which midi is supposed to work on. Shmois is Atzvos. I didn't even go into it too much, but Shmois is Atzvos, for example, and Va'ero Bikas and Gaiva, and there's like a lot of literature to figure out, because Kayidua, we know from the Arizal and his Talmidim that the parsha of the week forever maintains some connection to the Murah, to the time that's going on. So we're in Parshas Va'era, does it talk about being Misak and Kas? And we're in Parshas Truma, does it talk about Misak and another Midah? So in the Chassidish Svarim, there's a big arichas on these Midas, not just on the Kedusha V'Tahara. Now, the tikkun of Kedusha V'Tahara, so we know, I don't think we know much about a specific Mahalach. Amongst the Mekubalim, there's endless, arichas in the pratim of the tikkunim, and how one should go about it, and what you do to be misakin it, and specific tefillas, and specific days. And I'm not going to get into that, because I don't think that the minig that we have, B'chol Tevutz Yiseinu, reflects that. Meaning, maybe they're like, in Rav Gamliel Rabinovich's yeshiva in Shara Shemayim, I saw someone sent me a clip, he says, Shovavim was meant for specific averis, kayidua, and regular people, we didn't even have shaykhs to be misakin on them. You're so far from them. By uns, we have people who don't have shaykhs to the avera b'chlal, who are going to do all the tikkunim for these averis. So you could buy in and you could have them, or so it may be in certain circles. It was a fundraising pitch. I don't think it was an unabashed fundraising pitch, but in certain circles of maybe elite mikubalim, yeshivas mikubalim, you might have still the actual. What is it?
Tshuva by proxy.
Yeah, exactly. The actual Seder Atikon and the Seder Atfilas and the specific ones that they do, that's maybe only in very miyuchad places. And some of the sources for some of these piyutim is a great deal, and it comes from the Sefer Chamdas Yamim, which I know you know about. Not so simple, where everything comes from that Sefer, so it's fine. Now, I just want to talk about what became, in the modern era, a more popular expression of this drive to focus on Averis and Tahara, is that we, in many Kehilas, there'll be shiurim on the halachas that are relevant to a person's daily life, that involve, Kiddush and Tahara, Chasnida, etc., right? There'll be shiurim, many shuls will have a few shiurim on the halachas that are relevant to these inyanim. So, really, it starts from the Chassidim, to be honest with you, that the Kotzke Rebbe writes extremely strongly that the ultimate meaning, what I'm saying is, it starts from the Chassidim, is that the Kotzke writes that the ultimate tikkun for this Aveira is not all the piyutim and sidra and tehillim and whatever. The tikkun is being oisik b'Torah b'iyun. And he has a whole explanation in Kabbalah why learning Torah b'iyun is dafka the tikkun for this Aveira. And many other Chassidim, the Baal Tanya writes it, and the Kotzke writes it, many other Chassidim. But I want to read just a piece from Rav Chaim Volozhiner in Keser Rosh, in the end of Keser Rosh, which is Rav Chaim Volozhiner's Sefer on Haggis, which is, for us, a very chashuv source. So Rav Chaim Volozhiner writes, he has Hilchos Tshuva Ma'asim Tovim at the end of Keser Rosh. Now, he's not talking about specifically Shovavim. He's not talking about specifically Shovavim, but I want to read you what he says. He says, Tshuva la hanichshel v'avoyin keri kamat b'pesher rachman al-tzlan. Someone who was nichshel in the Averis that we're talking about. He says, Amar hu. Says it's written by a Talmud. Said Rav Chaim Volozhiner as follows: Kisha oisik b'Torah ein sarach lidei klal. The Shayil was writing to him, and we have other sources. Rav Chaim Volozhiner wrote this in Nefesh HaChaim. He wrote it in his Pirush on Pirkei Avos. He wrote it many times. The taina that he's answering is Keilu. The Zoyar and the Gemara Nida and many Sifrei Musar are full of shrekelcha descriptions of what happens to a person and et cetera, and the amount of tanesim, an inordinate amount of tanesim that a person has to fast, etc. Says Rav Chaim, Kisha oisik b'Torah ein sarach lidei. The person doesn't have to worry klal. U'kazeh shoyel mi Rabbi Hagrazal. He asked his Rebbe the Goin, v'herelei maimer b'tikunim b'sefer Musar machmirim ma'oid b'inyin zeh. Rav Chaim Volozhiner showed the Goin, look, it says in this sefer, look, it says in this sefer, look, a whole list, a whole litany of different svarim describing the chaymer ha'inyin. Ma'oid b'inyin hazeh, shetzarach lizbul yisurim kashim rurim kemaves, v'en takana kiyim b'misa mamash ayin sham shenemar v'afar achiyikach. At the end of the Maimer in the Tikkunei Zayir is something that's good for people to pay attention to. Shekasav, Avalei Raisa, the Torah, Oirach Yamim B'Yamina V'chulu. It just ends off it's like a Medrash Pliya. At the end of it, it says Avalei Raisa, Oirach Yamim B'Yamina. It doesn't even, the Tikkunei Zayir doesn't even tie it back in. Says Rav Chaim Volozhiner b'Shem the Goin, Pirush Shematzelis Min HaMisa. Torah saves from Misa. The say for that pasuk, Shematzelis min Yisurim kashim k'misa. It saves from Yisurim that are hard like Misa. Sifrei Musar lehiviu zeis. This is Rav Chaim Volozhiner's critique at the end. He says the Sifrei Musar, they just leave out that last line that the Tikkunei Zayir says, and just because the Tikkunei doesn't wrap it up. It just says, Eraisa Oircham b'mina v'smoil oishav v'kavod. It doesn't say what it means. It doesn't say what it wants. It says Rav Chaim Volozhiner in the name of the Goin. What the Tikkunei Zayir was saying is at the end of it is that there's a shortcut. Yeah, everything we said, all the Sefer Musa, all the Tikkunim, all the thing, is a shortcut. And from here, and similar sources like this, is where a great minig developed in Klal Yisrael to focus on the Limud HaTorah aspect of it, meaning the easiest, kilu shortcut, most direct shortcut to kilu address what these weeks are about and what they have the potential to be misakin, without actually going into any of the Kabbalistic Tikkunim and charts and figuring it out, is Torah. Rav Chaim Volozhiner writes in Pirkei Avos or in Nefesh HaChaim, says rather a great play in word. He says, Torah, you learn it, it spreads around, it takes over your whole thing. He says, Lashon, he says, the Mishnah of Pirkei Avos describes Torah. It says, machsharasai liyis tzadik v'chasid. Hechsher means like hechsher the Kabbalah Tumah, or kosher, kashrus, prepares, right? Like it says of Chaim Lashner, hechsher means a different play in a word. Lashon hechsher means hagala v'libun. Like when you kasher a keli. Like you do hagala and libun on a keli, you kasher a keli. It says v'libun mipigul giyuli arash betchila. The Torah is like hagala. It's like hechsher. It's like putting it in hechsher v'libun. When shekasav halekoi dvarei keish. The Torah is referred to as fire. Fire heats. So fire does libun. Fire does hechsher. Shimul abnasay machshirasay v'chenisa b'tanchuma she'atayr mitahara libun v'kliyasan shel tamidei chachamim. The Torah purifies like libun, the lave and the kloyes of a Talmud Chacham. So Chaim Lashner, in many places, he does it in Nefesh Chaim, he does it here, he does it in Ruach Chaim. He's very pushing this shortcut that the Goyim told him, that a shortcut for all tikkunim and for all averis is to do limud Torah. And Lamaisa, this is something that became very popular in the Chassidish Welt and in the Litvish Welt. There's many Gracer Rebbes who are very strongly pushing that Torah and limud Torah be'iyin and limud Torah is the ultimate tikkun. So the specific fasts and tanesim and etc. kind of fell to the wayside, and it became much more focused on learning specific halachas during these kufas. That is the shortcut to tikkun. Now, I just want to end with mamash a tidbit. I think like some safe to summarize what we're saying over here is what it seems to me is that Shovavim is an opportunity. Shovavim is like you get an extra dose of the korva of Aseres Yemei Tshuva or Bahab in the middle of the winter. Middle of a cold winter, we have a long time between Yemei Tshuva to Yemei Tshuva, we get another opportunity. I came across something that I think it explains this type of thing. I just wanted to share because it's interesting to me. There's a brisa in Kalarabsi. Kalarabsi is in the back of the Zara now. It's Chaim Kanievsky said that it's part of Talmud Bavli. It's Gemara. It's regular Gemara. The Maisa, we didn't have it. None of the Rishonim and Achronim had it for a very long time. It was published the first time like in the early 1800s. They collected bits and pieces from here. We didn't have the whole Kalarabsi. But in Kalarabsi, it says a story as follows. And this is really a PSS to all our Nittel and Yeshu stuff. It says a story as follows. That there was three Tanoim were sitting on Har Bayis. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Elazar were sitting on Har Bayis. And two children passed by them. And one of them wasn't wearing a yarmulke, which was a tremendous chutzpah to walk past the Chachamim in the Beis HaMikdash. And the other one was. Or Al Kapanim, when he passed by the Chachamim, he took his yarmulke out of his jacket and he put it on. The Machlekes in the Mefarshim on the Kalarabsi. So that the Tanoim sitting there, they comment and they say, Kama chatzif hayinuka. Like, look, this kid's mamish grace and mechutzif. And one of them says, yeah, he must be a Ben Anida. And the other one says, yeah, he must be a Ben another psul. Says Rabbi Akiva, who was the youngest, who was the Talmud. So Rabbi Akiva says he's a mamzer. It's more than everything, he's a mamzer. And there are some historians and Sefer Itis who believe that this Kalarabsi is another version in Chazal referring to Yeshu. So that's why it's a PSS to whatever we're talking about. But so the story continues, the Kalarabsi continues the story. It says that the people sitting around jumped in Rabbi Akiva and they said, how do you have the chutzpah to argue in your Rebbeim, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Elazar, and Befrat to say something outlandish? He's a mom. Like, how can you possibly know that? How are you backing that up? So Rabbi Akiva says, I'll show you, I'll back it up. He says he goes, he does research, and he finds the kid's mother selling small trinkets in a shuk. And he goes over it and he says, no, tell me the story with your son. Well, what's the backstory with your son? She says, my son? Nah, kosher v'yosher, regular kid. He says, no, tell me for real. And if you tell me, ani meviacha l'chaya elam haba. If you tell me, I'm going to bring you to elam haba. He says, oh, really? That's a good deal. And she tells him, kach v'kach ha'maisa, and yeah, he's a mamzer. That's what she tells him in the story. So the Gemara ends off, it comments, wow, Rabbi Akiva, ashrecha Rabbi Akiva, that he was able to see even tifer than everybody else. So now, says the Gemara has a kasha. The Gemara says, but Lamaisa, how could Rabbi Akiva promise her Elam Haba? It's not his to give out. How does Rabbi Akiva promise her Elam Haba? So the Gemara says, either it was Nishba, but Veliba was Liba Lehe Shaveh, and it's a Dvarim Shavalev, it's a Sugya, or he said it in a misleading term. He said, Ani Mevi Elam Haba, I bring people to Elam Haba. And he could be he's referring to his Talmidim, or to people who are anyhow going to Elam Haba. He wasn't actually promising her Elam Haba. That's the second version. Says Rav Chaim Kanievsky in his beer on Kalarabsi, he teaches as follows. Ani Mevi'el Elam Haba, says Rav Chaim Kanievsky, of course Rabbi Akiva couldn't promise her Elam Haba. He couldn't give her Elam Haba. It's not his to give out. Rabbi Akiva was saying is, I have enough pull that I could get you an appointment by the Bezdin Shalmala. You're a person who, b'etzem, when you die, you should be straight to Gehenna. Like, you don't belong here, b'chal. You're not going to get a hearing, b'chal. You're going to get just a summary judgment. I'm very connected. I could get you a hearing. I could bring you in front of the Bezdin Shemal, in front of Kadosh Baruch Hu. You'll get a hearing. From there, already it's in your hands. That's Rav Chaim Tash, which is it's a Murray the Gezach to think of in the Gemara. So just
isn't it brought down? They would call that veil of situation
on the Bezdin. I don't know exactly where it says that. Yeah, people say that. I don't know exactly where that comes from. But
there's a lot of this type of shra.
I'm saying the Gemara itself. I'm saying the Gemara itself asked the kasha.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, my point is fakir. My point is fakir. I think that we have a very easy time talking like this. Any gadol, any person, like, you can bring everyone to Elam Hava. The Kalarabsi, the Gemara itself, Kilu critiques Reb Akiva and says, like, how can you talk like that? I'm just literally just quoting the Gemara, and this is what the Brisa Gemara, whatever you want to call it. It's zicher comes from the base medrash of the Gedolei Amiraim. It's zicher from the same time as Talmud Bavli. Even if you don't want to call it Talmud Bavli.
Why would he want to do it? That's the shot.
Maybe I'm just saying the way the Mefarshim learned it is not like that. And so just to circle back around, why am I saying this? I think that probably the best way to describe what Shovavim and all these yamim that are mesugalim for kapara is an appointment. We have enough pull that we get an appointment. What you do with it, how you think, it's an appointment. That's the connection.
Very good.
Okay, to be continued.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.